I happened to be at PNC Park in Pittsburgh for Wednesday's matinee between the Tigers and the Pirates. The game had a most unusual denouement. Now, when I go to a game, I don't leave early, and I don't mind extra innings, more of what I love. Plus, I didn't know when I'd next be in Pittsburgh. PNC is just a beautiful park, perfectly situated. I mean, would you rather sit behind the plate and look out at bridges over the rivers, or go to Washington and stare at the parking decks? Holy moly, what a choice they made in each place. I was going to soak it up as long as I could. But after the game, we were leaving town, and I wanted to hit one more bookstore before I went home. Hey, you do what's important to you on a trip. Maybe you go antiquing, or you hit all the art galleries or the vintage clothing stores. I like the used bookstores. And I am fortunate enough to have married someone who feels exactly the same way I do. The problem was they closed relatively early in the day. So all game long, I was sweating the ending. Could they get this one in 3 hours or less? And the game was close throughout, with the Tigers leading. And the idea of their closer, Kenley Jansen, trying to save it made me twitchy. Because even when Jansen was at his peak, and this year ain't that, he was never a 3-and-out guy. He made you sweat it. And I was sweating it in anticipation. I like him. I root for him. He's had a great career. But I really didn't want him to mess up my plans. Well, he did. Sort of. Almost. As I said, it was 3-1 Tigers going to the bottom of the 7th inning. With one out, Pirates manager Don Kelly pinch hit catcher Ramon Flores for the non-hitting catcher Henry Davis. And I was not thrilled because A.J. Hinch called on Jacob Waguespack. And Waguespack pitches like someone whose pitches are going to wag and then get spacked. Spack. His ERA is superficially good, but no strikeouts, balls going out of the park. And indeed, Flores spacked one of his wags deep to left field. 3-2. Okay, I was still safe. Still was going to get to do what I wanted to do. But now we were assured of getting Jansen if no one put up some crooked numbers. Well, hell, damnation, and date bread, no one did that. Last licks for the Pirates. Here comes Kenley Jansen. Mississippi Jake Mangum first up. He pinch hit for Jared Triolo. Kenley whiffed him on 3 straight pitches. He's back, baby, and I am starting to react. Now Flores came up again, and Jansen got 2 quick strikes, and I'm practically smug. I can see myself hitting the parking lot with the game time at about 2:45. The store was only 15 minutes away. I was in good shape. I'm going to get what I want this one time. And at that point, Kenley Jansen fed a ball so straight down the middle that it could have been a proctoscope. It could have been on a conveyor belt heading to the delivery truck. And Flores crushed it to left field, roughly the same spot that he had spacked that wag earlier. Tie game, and I wanted to rend my garments. I want to get back to that home run in 1 second, that second Flores home run. Let me just wrap up the game real fast. I needed someone to walk it off so we didn't go to extras. There was still hope. Next up was Spencer Horowitz, a player I really like, and he was killing it before going on the IL at the end of June. But since coming back, he's been hitting 128. I didn't think it would be him, and it wasn't. He hit a shallow fly ball to right field, 2 outs. My last hope was Brandon Lau, who has hit very well for the Pirates. He was my last chance. I knew he could do it, but Jansen got ahead 1-2. I was resigned to extra innings. I know what batters hit after going down 1-2. And on that last pitch, Lowe hit one high and far to right. So high, so far that I thought they were too much of each, meaning it was either going to scrape the wall and be caught or curve foul. It did neither. It banged off the pole, and the Pirates danced on the field, and I was dancing in the stands. It was a historic ending. Not too many games end like that. A home run to tie and a home run to win. And a moment later, I was dancing out to my car. Except for one thing. It took a long time to get out of the building, and that was very strange. The Pirates have a rotunda, and they had closed all but one gate of that thing, and thousands of people were trying to strain out of that one portal It was like a macroscopic demonstration of trying to pass a kidney stone. Well, hundreds of kidney stones. And I appreciated the demonstration of the traffic control problems of Old Ebbets Field. We've talked about that on the show many times. Oh, what a wonderful ballpark. Oh, we missed that ballpark so badly, but no one could get in or out. Oh, that beautiful baseball rotunda, which was much like having an obstructed colon. So, yeah, I'm sentimental about that park too, though it was wiped off the face of the earth before I was born. I would have liked to have gotten a chance to see it, but that was not one of its best aspects. Well, here they were doing it. And as I finally squeezed out, A, I heard an usher say, people are yelling at me, but this wasn't my choice. And B, there was a dog right at the exit. And I don't just mean a random dog. It was a flag dog. And it was there either to sniff for drugs or explosives. Now, that's my inference. Nobody said anything. It would have been nice if they had, because I would like to know if I was part of some sting operation or some terrorist had threatened to blow up the exiting crowd. I was immediately apprehensive, but we left without incident. If you've been paying attention to the news, you haven't heard anything, neither have I, so I don't know what that was. But back to Flores' home run. Jansen gave it up on an 0-2 pitch, and my second thought after, oh, you bastard, you've screwed up my everything, was Rogers Hornsby would be pissed right now. Now, the list of things that made Rogers Hornsby angry was very long, starting with his horse coming in fourth, and proceeded to include just about everything and everyone you can think of. But I was thinking specifically that in his roughly 15 mostly unsuccessful seasons as a manager, he had a standing rule that a pitcher who gave up a hit on 0-2, who in fact did not knock the batter off the plate or did not knock him down, would be fined. Hornsby's pitchers loved him, like a father to them he was. So Kenley Jansen would have been in trouble. But okay, Hornsby's have gone wherever Hornsby's go after the fact, and Jansen may well have been in trouble with his own manager. I certainly felt bad for him. It was a humiliating defeat, but I was glad that he was free to pitch as he wanted to pitch on 0-2, even if the results had been far from optimal. Because rigidity is the enemy of spontaneity. It forces life into narrow channels, and you become predictable. This is a bad idea for baseball or baseball coaching, but as brilliant a hitter as Hornsby was, he didn't understand that aspect of things. So I took that away. I drive the however many thousands of miles, it's not thousands really, but back to my home here in New Jersey, and I start working on this episode and a story about a different pitcher that I'm going to get into in a few minutes from now. And I came across this, which validated my reaction both to Kenley's mistake and Hornsby's predictability. On September 18th, 1934, so practically yesterday, the Red Sox were visiting the Browns, who were in fact managed by Rogers Hornsby. Again, this is a complete coincidence that I came across this story this week. The brothers Farrell, Wes and Rick, made up the Boston Battery. Wes pitching, Rick, now in the Hall of Fame, catching. The opposing battery featured two players who have appeared on or been the subject of multiple episodes of this podcast, Bobo Newsom and catcher Raleigh Hemsley. But that matchup didn't last long because Wes and Rick were ejected by home plate umpire Lou Coles in the top of the second. Why? Because Wes came up with 2 outs and the bases loaded. He was a very good hitter for a pitcher. He was a very good hitter for almost anybody, actually. Well, again, we'll get into that more in a moment. Well, Newsom quickly got ahead, 0-2. Farrell got set for the third pitch. It came in, and he took it. "Strike 3, you're out," shouts Coles. And Farrell loses it. "You blind expletive of inappropriate contact with your own expletive, you expletive. Bobo wouldn't dare throw 3 straight strikes. Hornsby would fine him a month's pay if he didn't waste a pitch." You see, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. And either way, you inevitably wind up in the infinite inning. there, and welcome back to the show. Infinite Inning number 389 in an ongoing series. I am, as I have ever been and ever will be, your congenial host, Stephen Goldman, for this trip to the past on a mission to better understand the present, the time machine being the game of baseball. And I hope hearing me say that has not become predictable, but I find the formulation works. It encapsulates what we're doing here. Don't need to reinvent the wheel every single week. I hope this episode finds you and yours well and enjoying the late summer. I, as I said, have been away. I'm very happy to be back, though. There's always a little trepidation when you've pushed away from your desk for a while. You relax, you let your guard down. If you're me, you let your mind drift a little bit. It's not so focused on the next idea, the next story. Hopefully some of that is percolating in the background and you hit it again fresh. And I certainly feel that way. I'm very pleased to be back with you. In a few minutes, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that feeling of liberation that I experienced while I was gone. And oddly enough, a pitcher who had his own rigidities, Wes Ferrell, who I've already mentioned, is a decent guide in that area. You may disagree. You may just say he was out of control, and you might be right, but I am taking him as a symbol of freedom, at least today. Ask me again next week. I might feel differently. Before we get to that, on the other side of this segment, I want to encore a bit that I did on Tommy John, who I eulogized at Baseball Prospectus this week. It goes back to episode 98 when Tyler Kepner was good enough to drop by, and I thought it was worth revisiting since not everyone goes deep diving in the archives. As I said in my BP column, I think Tommy John's surgery, while important historically, was not the most interesting thing about him. It's great that he was patient zero, but if he hadn't lain down on that table, some other athlete would have. The glory properly belongs to Dr. Frank Jobe, the inventor, with proportional credit to John for his bravery. But there were many other incidents in John's career which were worthy of consideration, I think, beyond that. And also, John's career as a whole forces us to think critically about the way we value pitchers or players, other people for that matter, and asks us to put aside certain preconceived notions or prejudices about our expectations. For example, he won 288 games. Now, if he had hit that arbitrary 300 win mark, he'd be in the Hall of Fame. Well, he missed time for that famous surgery for which he's so lauded. He missed time for 3 labor stoppages at least. He missed time to serve his country. He missed time to take care of one of his children who was at death's door for a time. But knowing that, are we still going to insist that he didn't do enough? Are we going to have a little generosity? Or are we going to be constipated like a Rogers Hornsby? That's the question that I wanted to ask. He also missed time for another severe injury, a pre-Frank Jobe injury. And if you remember episode 98, I talked about it. If you haven't heard it, it will be coming up in just a few minutes. Not to give that surgery short shrift, by the way. I feel very good that it happened or that the procedure was developed in the same way that I so often here on the program laud the invention of antibiotics and remind you of the many players who were murdered by tuberculosis. A few episodes back, we talked about the Cleveland pitcher Veen Gregg, maybe it was more than a few episodes, who won 20 games in each of his first 3 seasons, complaining of arm pain all the while. And then he couldn't pitch anymore. Wes Ferrell, again, who we will say more about in just a few minutes, came up with Cleveland as well about 16 years later and won 20 games in each of his first 4 seasons, complaining of arm pain all the while. And he was able to pitch well for a while after that, but he had to reinvent himself as more of a junk baller. And as with Tommy John, who often described the moment that his ulnar collateral ligament snapped, Ferrell had that experience in a game. I don't know that it was the UCL. It just sounds exactly the same as the way that John described it. He threw a curveball and twang. I happen to be sticking with Cleveland pitchers because both Ferrell is on my mind today and because John first came up with Cleveland in 1963. Then Gabe Paul threw him away, along with 1966 AL Rookie of the Year Tommy Agee. In the future, that is, he was the AL Rookie of the Year, to undo the Rocky Colavito trade made by Frank Lane 6 years earlier. Couple of quick notes. Last time around, when I was thanking listener Oliver, who solved the mystery of the Merlins, I forgot to mention, or at least I think I did. If I'm repeating myself, I apologize, but I think this slipped by me because I was extremely harried, that he has a Blue Sky account dedicated to this day in the life of Lou Gehrig. It's at lougehrigreplay.bsky.social, and if you enjoy what we do here, and oh boy, have we spent a lot of time on Lou and on Eleanor as well, you will no doubt enjoy that too. Second, I wanted to alert you to something that my pal and frequent collaborator here on the show, Cliff Corcoran, is doing. He is covering the new Women's Pro Baseball League for Howard Megdal's The Nine sports site. And he's writing a weekly Baseball Insider column about that as well. It's available both on the site and as a direct-to-email newsletter. If you've not heard about the WPBL in Cincinnati, these women have grown tired of packing and unpacking up and down round about the dial. I don't think I have those words right. That's a different thing. Never mind the digression. If you haven't heard about that league, it began play on August 1st, a women's hardball league, and is now just past the midway point of its 15-game season. The league came together in an ad hoc way on a limited budget, and so there have been growing pains, but most of the top female baseball players in the world are involved, and the games have been a lot of fun. Now, there have been compromises. The league plays all its games in Robin Roberts Stadium in Springfield, Illinois. They don't have travel money. There are 4 teams: the New York Heights, the Boston Hunters, the Los Angeles Queens, and the San Francisco Firebells, all with cleverly designed logos and spiffy uniforms, and you know that would be important to the man of 1,000 baseball caps. All the games are on ESPN Select in the United States, YouTube internationally, with Thursday and Sunday games simulcast on the Scripps Sports Network. There are also highlights available on YouTube. There's a lot more to be said about it, but as Cliff told me, many people have waited decades for there to be a league like this, so it's very exciting that it exists, and here's hoping it does well enough to continue and grow and have future seasons, which could and should see the teams relocate to their associated cities, the league expand, the schedule lengthen, among other changes. I'd very much like to see that as well, so check it out and see if your support can make a difference. I've watched a bit of it so far. You can see that this is a first-year league. It's more primitive in its style of play than the 150-year-old exclusively male major leagues. But as a history guy, I promise you that whether we're talking about the first-year National League in 1876 or the American League in 1901, it would have looked a lot like this. It takes time for a league to grow into maturity and attain high standards, or for that matter, to play a full schedule. And if you go back even further to the National Association, you had teams dropping out midway. But in either case, National Association or National League, no one played a 154 or 162 game season right off. They had to build up to that. These women just need that time. And I very much hope they get it, because women can play baseball. And there should be a league of their own. I am, as ever, up against a break, so let's pause here. On the other side, we return to episode 98 in our discussion of the late, unfortunately, great sinkerballing lefty Tommy John, who passed away earlier this week. And then on the far side, we return to Wes Farrell, a red ass, but just now I wish I could be more like him. So hang in there, please. And I'll see you, and past me will see you as well, on the other side. The story I want to tell you today is just a brief extrapolation on part of the discussion that I did have with Tyler Kepner. Tommy John shows up in his book in the chapter, as you would expect, on the sinker. That was his signature pitch. He got grounder after grounder. Early in his career, he had more strikeouts. Later in his career, he had pretty much none at all, and he got by anyway. As you will hear, Tyler brought up how many base runners Tommy John allowed, how many hits. He had some very high hits allowed totals, particularly late in his career because of his ground balling approach and the fact that he was a pitch to contact guy. And I mentioned that, hey, Jack Morris had a lot of base runners too. Neither of us wanted to have a Jack Morris in the Hall of Fame debate, and I don't even want to have a Tommy John for the Hall of Fame debate because, as you know, I think the non-museum part of the Hall is a vast, masturbatory waste of time. Actually, I think it's inferior to masturbation because at least that's pleasurable, whereas a Hall of Fame debate is about anal retentive scolds telling you who should be in the perfect collection of hairpins or Matchbox cars or classic Barbie dolls, and it's always their favorite classic Barbie doll or Matchbox car. And even if you can make an objective argument for that, great. Well, that argument exists independent of whether anyone puts a plaque on the wall. And after someone puts the plaque on the wall, they forget about who it was they enplaqued anyway. And see, I'm doing it. I've allowed myself to go down that rabbit hole. Never mind. The point that I was trying to make in bringing up Jack Morris versus Tommy John is that although they were very different pitchers, both at times tended to put a lot of runners on base, and there's just more than one way to be a great pitcher in this game. That's not something that Tyler was disputing. As you'll hear, he doesn't dispute it at all. He agrees with it. It was just an observation that I was making. John's style of pitching meant, as I said, balls in play. That meant they found holes sometimes, or if the defense was not particularly great that day, then they went through at a higher rate, as we now know to expect. Morris walked more batters than John did and gave up a lot more home runs. Nevertheless, if you look at WHIP, walks and hits per 9 innings pitched, they're about the same, with 1.296 to be technical for Morris and 1.283 for John. Their careers had significant overlap, but sure, we should grant Morris the understanding that John pitched during the low-scoring 1960s, so you can penalize him something for that. Still, if we look at ERA plus, Park and league-adjusted ERA, it's 105 for Morris, 111 for John. Putting that aside, though, one thing that always amazes me about John is how his 26-year career, one of the longest in the history of the game, almost didn't happen. And I'm not talking about the surgery that bears his name. Sure, there was no guarantee that it would work. So in that sense, the continuance of his career was in itself something unusual. But that didn't happen until September 1974. What I'm referring to happened in August 1968. At that point, in that year, John was 25, already in his 5th major league season. He was with his second team, the Chicago White Sox. Those were dark times on the South Side. I imagine a Star Wars title scroll when I say that. It was a dark time for the South Side Empire. Heading into 1968, the Sox were on a streak of 17 straight winning seasons. Sure, they only won one pennant in that stretch, but that's still one of the longest streaks of competence in the history of the game. They would have done better. It was just that certain basic functions like acquiring a first baseman or a third baseman who was better than replacement level for more than a month at a time just eluded them year after year. But this was also a team that had Sherm Lawler behind the plate, Nellie Fox and Luis Aparicio up the middle, Minnie Minoso in the outfield, and the great lefty Billy Pierce on the mound. In 1967, they were right in the AL pennant race until the last minute. They went 89-73 and finished 3 games out, but they had been tied for first place as late as September 6th. That all came to a crashing halt, as they say, in 1968. Just about everything that possibly could go wrong went wrong, and some of it was self-inflicted. Eddie Stanky was a terrible manager who feuded with his players. General manager Ed Short had traded away 2 of the team's best players, Don Buford and Tommy Agee, for veterans who were intended to erase that 3-game gap. Buford went to the Orioles and brought a reunion with Aparicio. and AG went to the Mets for a bunch of players. The main one was gimpy left fielder Tommy Davis, who had been very briefly an MVP level player with the Dodgers back in the earliest part of the decade, but injuries erased his mobility, and although he sometimes still hit well after that, he wasn't the same level of hitter either. They were just crushed by those deals. As good as Buford was with the Orioles, he was already 30 and coming off a down year, and the White Sox looked at him as an infielder, whereas the Orioles planned to take the defensive pressure off of him and put him in the outfield, and he really took off at that point, but maybe still it's not fair to second-guess that deal. But the AG move, if it happened today, would cause Twitter to literally catch fire. It was that bad. He was a 25-year-old center fielder with speed and power, 1 year removed from winning the AL Rookie of the Year award. He had Hall of Fame level athletic ability, even if he didn't turn out to have Hall of Fame level longevity. He had even less longevity than that, actually. But had he come along a few years later, he would have been an easy 30-30 guy several times. Just watch a 1969 Mets highlight film sometime if you want to see what I mean. He was ridiculously talented. But he was gone, and the White Sox opened the 1968 season 0-10 and never did get off the deck. They eventually fired Stanky and brought their great future Hall of Fame manager Al Lopez back out of retirement. And not only was Lopez's heart more on the golf course than in the dugout, he immediately went down with appendicitis and disappeared for 5 weeks. On opening day, the Sox drew about 7,500 fans. They also played 9 games in Milwaukee, which were much better attended and seemed like an overture to moving there. And in midsummer, the Democratic National Convention came to town, turned the city into a war zone and a national story, not in a good way, and ultra-racist George Wallace supporters invaded Comiskey Park and heckled the African-American players. Heckled is probably too polite a term. It was just a very ugly place to be on every level. Nationally, this was also the year that Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert Kennedy were assassinated. Richard Nixon was elected president. The Vietnam War was dragging on, slug-like, leaving a trail of blood behind it. The country was just massively dysfunctional in almost every sense. There are many years that are candidates for the worst in the history of the Republic, and without trying to make a definitive survey of that very subjective category, you'd think that 1968 was in the top 3, and the Chicago White Sox have the distinct honor of being a really, really, really small part of that. Well, one of their many low points came on August 22nd when the Sox went to Detroit to play the first-place Tigers. Tommy John started for the White Sox, and if you look up this game, it's neat how many good or great players were in this game, not just John, but also Aparicio, Hoyt Wilhelm, Wilbur Wood, Al Kaline, Bill Freehan, Mickey Lolich. The list is actually a lot longer than that. The game was just a normal game until the bottom of the 3rd inning. Lolich, the Tigers pitcher, led off and struck out as pitchers are wont to do, and that flipped the lineup and brought up Tigers leadoff hitter, second baseman Dick McAuliffe. McAuliffe was a really good player, a power-hitting second baseman, but that's not really all that relevant to the story I'm telling. If you look him up, check him out through age 24 through 29, he hit .252 with 18 home runs and 71 walks a season, and in the offense-starved 1960s or late 1960s, that works out to a 125 OPS plus. And what happened with McAuliffe is simply that a typical little baseball spat escalated badly. He escalated it. John went to 3-2 on him, and the next pitch got away from John and went over McAuliffe's head all the way to the backstop. It was so high that the catcher could not get a glove on it. So, ball 4, right? No, not just that. As McAuliffe went down to first base, he started yelling at John. John later said that he didn't really understand what McAuliffe said, but he yelled back, and suddenly McAuliffe charged the mound. McAuliffe made an unprovoked attack. Sox general manager Ed Short said after, "Nobody throws at a batter on a 3-2 count," and the pitch in question went a foot over McAuliffe's head clear to the backstop. There was some bad blood there, though. That's why the pitch looked to McAuliffe worse than it was. Not that anyone ever represented what had happened correctly.
In McAuliffe's Sabre biography, he's quoted as saying, Al Lopez was managing the White Sox, and they weren't that far out of the race at the time. I was sort of the spark plug of the Tigers, scoring a lot of runs and playing good defense. So they must have felt if they were minus me, maybe John could hit me in the kneecap and I'd be out for 2 or 3 weeks and they could catch up. I wish my ego was that strong. At the start of play on August 22nd, 1968, the Tigers were leading the American League by 7 games at 80 and 45. The White Sox were in 9th place at 47 and 76. They were a mere 28 games back with 37 games to play. Just how much catching did McAuliffe imagine that they would have done by knocking him out of the lineup? If the White Sox had gone 37 and 0 over the rest of the season, the Tigers could have gone only 10 and 27 and still finished ahead of them. So even baseball players have dumb little conspiracy theories about the dramas that they play out. The general manager of the Tigers, Jim Campbell, was a little more sensible in trying to explain it. He said, "They hit 8 of our guys in the series there, and we didn't hit any of theirs." It's easy to misread that sentence as applying to the series in which the fight took place. According to Baseball Reference, no Tigers were hit by the White Sox in the course of the series. The Tigers' Pat Dobson, however, did hit Chicago's Pete Ward. What Campbell meant by that series there was they hit 8 of our guys in a series in Chicago in mid-June. That was the truth, and Tommy John was in the middle of it. They played 4 games. No one was hit in the first one, but in the second game, John hit Willie Horton twice, and Don Wirt and Ray Euler once each. John was no headhunter, but he did hit Horton and Wirth after Freehan had hit a home run. So it must have seemed at least a little suspicious, right? No one thought that. John's explanation after the game was, "My pitches were sailing today, and that is unusual for me. Even when I was warming up before the game, they were sailing. The first time I hit Horton, it was on a fastball that just sailed a foot inside. The second time was another fastball that he didn't even try to get out of the way of. Wirt was hit by a curve, and Ray Euler with another sailing fastball." Horton said, "That's true. The first pitch did sail, and I was striding into the second pitch and couldn't get out of the way. I respect a pitcher who throws inside to keep a hitter honest. When you're hitting well, you have to expect that, as long as they don't try to throw behind me." In his career, John hit about 4 batters per 200 innings. 1968 was the only year he was in double figures. He hit 12, and that might have had something to do with the way the White Sox were forced to use him that season. You've heard National Guard members derisively referred to as weekend warriors, right? John had to turn that on its head that year. As I said, the Vietnam War was on, and John was serving out his military obligations by serving in the Air National Guard. That meant that he was still available to the White Sox, but only on weekends. He was a weekend warrior for the White Sox. So, sure, why wouldn't he fight his command? He was only playing baseball once a week. I do know one thing, though. No pitcher in his right mind would hit Ray Euler intentionally. There's a story that's often repeated about Jimmy Pearsall, the Red Sox outfielder who had very famously had a breakdown. He battled mental illness in his life. He wrote a book about it called Fear Strikes Out. It was made into a movie with Anthony Perkins. Well, in 1958, when he hit 237, there was a Yankees-Red Sox game in which I guess there was a lot of high and tight pitching, a lot of intimidation. Some Red Sox had been knocked back, and Pearsall went to the plate and said to Yogi Berra doing the catching, "Yogi, I want you to know something. If you knock me down, I'm going to get up and hit you across the head with this baseball bat. And remember, I'm the guy who can plead temporary insanity and get away with it." And Yogi said, "Jim, we haven't knocked down a 230 hitter all year." Well, Euler was not a 230 hitter. He was a 175 hitter. I mean, in full-time play. He was a shortstop, just a pure glove man, and had a 48 OPS plus in his career, which lasted about 1,000 plate appearances. He just couldn't hit it all, and putting him on base free of charge was as close as you can come to an actual sin in baseball. So it does seem like John was just wild that day. Unfortunately, the next day changed that impression because the two teams played a doubleheader, and in Game 1, White Sox pitcher Joe Horlin hit Mickey Stanley, and in the nightcap, Cisco Carlos hit Stanley, Freehan, and Don Wirt. So, yeah, by that point, the Tigers probably changed their mind about the intentions behind John's wildness. When McAuliffe charged the mound, John tried to tackle him, and whether accidentally or on purpose, McAuliffe drove his knee into John's pitching shoulder. There was a picture of it from the Chicago Tribune the next day. I will put it up in the Facebook group, and it is plain as day what was happening, and it looks plenty intentional. We can't assume that, but it's hard to think otherwise when you look at the image. In his autobiography, John wrote that in a baseball brawl, if you survive the first 10 seconds, you won't get hurt. McAuliffe drove his knee deep into my pitching shoulder, ripping ligaments and causing a separation. The bench is emptied, but I didn't see any of it. I was on the ground, wreathing in pain. That was it for John's season. He ended the year with a record of 10-5 and an ERA of 1.98 in 177 and a third innings. Sure, it was a 1968 ERA. They were all low, but not all of them were 1.98 low. And John was great after that, too. Started right up again the next season, even after the injury and the mound being lowered. But I always wonder if he was the same great that he would have been after that injury. There's no way of knowing, especially given the diagnostics and surgical techniques of the time. Not even he would know. As for McAuliffe, American League presidential idiot Joe Cronin suspended him for 5 games and fined him $250, which really cheesed the Tigers off. But ask yourself if you would feel like that was sufficient punishment if a hitter tore Max Scherzer's arm out of the socket or Chris Sale's. Let's hope it never happens. But that's the first Tommy John story. He pitched for so long there are chapters and volumes and subplots. And then there's Jack Morris. He had that one big game. What can you do?
Well, I hope you enjoyed that flashback to episode 98. Should you wish to listen to all of it, it is there for you in the back catalog, available wherever podcasts are vended. Too bad you can't rent it at Blockbuster, I suppose. On the plus side, this is free, but on the downside, you can't buy candy at the register. I'll be back with a new segment in just a moment. We go from one of the best pitchers not in the Hall of Fame to another, Wesley Cheek Ferrell of Greensboro, North Carolina, just like his brother, Hall of Famer Rick. He was a 6-time 20-game winner for the Indians and the Red Sox. Why is he not in the Hall of Fame? Well, he won only 193 games total, albeit with a .601 winning percentage, because his managers had pitched his arm off by the time he was 28. His career ERA was .404, which looks bad, not because he was bad, but A, because he pitched in the 1930s, and B, he then spent 5 years trying to pitch after his arm was scragged. Through that age 28 season, his ERA was .372 in 2,125 and 2/3 innings adjust for park and league, and he was about 30% better than league average. After that, his ERA was .541, and you can't explain that away by saying it was a high-scoring environment. It was a high-scoring environment on him when he pitched. Ferrell was also a mini Shohei or mini Ruth, killing it when he got a bat in his hands. He was a career .280, .351, .446 hitter with 38 career home runs, which is still high up, I believe, second by one perhaps, on the list of, non-Shohei hitting pitchers. Actually, let's be accurate about that. Sticking specifically to when the player was pitching, not when he pinch hit, not when, as in Ferrell's case, he spotted in the outfield now and again. Ferrell hit 36 as a pitcher. Bob Lemon, who started out as a position player, as a third baseman, hit 35. Warren Spahn hit 35 as well. Earl Wilson of the Red Sox and the Tigers hit 33. Red Ruffing of the Yankees, another pitcher who was famous for his hitting, hit 32. And that's the top 5. Don Drysdale, Bob Gibson, Carlos Zambrano, I forgot all about that, .401 career slugging percentage, Walter Johnson, and Milt Pappas. round out the top 10, and that is the complete list of pitchers who hit 20 homers while pitching. And since the DH is now universal, except for Shohei and the occasional fellow like him, not that there have ever been many or any, that's what the list is going to be for the foreseeable future. You know, the funny thing is that when pitching, Shohei hits like a good hitter for a pitcher. He's a career 197, 300, 426 hitter as a pitcher. 3 home runs in 61 at-bats, which is not bad at all. And you take it if we were talking about, say, Dwight Gooden. Gooden prided himself on his hitting, and he wasn't bad by pitcher standards. In fact, his 196 career batting average, almost the same as Shohei's when he's pitching, but he only had 8 home runs career in 741 at-bats. So his slugging percentage was only .262. Very different. But still, it seems like most of us, we can walk and chew gum at the same time, but when we try to do something more complex than that, we do start to struggle a little. Baseball Reference fixes Wes Ferrell with about 60 WAR career. Tommy John is in the same ballpark. So for that matter is CC Sabathia, who's now in the Hall. He has about the same career WAR as Dazzy Vance, but I don't know if he belongs in the Hall of Fame. And as you heard me say a few minutes ago in the flashback part of the episode, I don't much care. Yet, he must have been pretty fun to watch. Another reason for that, not just the pitching, not just the hitting, he could be angry and impulsive. Actually, that sort of person isn't fun. They tend to make one a bit nervous. So imagine what it might have been like to have that guy as a teammate. If I can draw on personal experience again, very recent personal experience, just for a moment. As you know, as I said earlier, I took a quick trip this week. I spent some time, had a wonderful time, visiting with some dear old friends who I'm happy to say remain dear, remain friends. I won't comment on the old part because that would reflect on me as well. And I was a bit envious, in a good way, I mean, in a happy way, because I kept noticing that their work-life balance seemed much more in harmony than mine and my wife's have been over the last few years. And I left vowing to change that. I kept asking myself, why are we pushing ourselves so hard? I asked it of myself. I asked it of my wife. And from somewhere out there, somewhere in the void, the answer came back.
Money.
Well, gee, that was hard to argue with. Fair enough, voice, I said. Yet, I think we could let things slip just a little, claw back 5 or 10% of our time, and our quality of life would be so much better. All it would take is a little self-discipline. Is that so much to ask?
Money.
Okay, I get it. You don't have...
Money.
Would you cut that out already?
Money.
It would have been very satisfying to tell that voice to do something anatomically impossible, shout, "I quit!" and walk out on our many commitments, consequences be damned. I guess that's just not me. But Wes Ferrell would have. I know that because he did. It was August 21st, 1936, at Yankee Stadium. The Red Sox were in, managed by shortstop Joe Cronin. Cronin was not playing that day. That would be significant. Ferrell pitched against Monty Pearson, against Joe DiMaggio, Lou Gehrig, and Bill Dickey, among other worthies, as well as an unworthy in the reprobate racist Jake Powell, who did figure in the key play of the game. The score was tied 1-1, going to the Yankees' turn at bat in the bottom of the 6th. Ferrell still in pitching. There were 2 outs, runners on first and third, and Powell at the plate. Ferrell later recounted this moment, well, several times, but to the historian, in this case Donald Honig, but the years had replaced Powell with DiMaggio in his memory. It was not Joltin' Joe he had popped out leading off the inning. It was indeed Powell. Still, Ferrell's recollections to Honig were consistent with other accounts he had given over the years. I'm going to jump back and forth between a couple of them. He said that with Powell coming up, he walked over to shortstop Eric Boob McNair in for Cronin that day and said, "Now, I'm going to throw him a slider and try to make him hit it to you." He then went back to the mound and he said, "I threw my best sailor ball and Powell hit it right where I thought he would. McNair was not there. He came over, failed to scoop up the ball, tripped, and almost fell." In the Honig version, he said, with more generosity than he had felt in the moment, "The ball was hit right off the end of the bat and had such spin on it that when it hit the ground, it got away from McNair." I have no idea what southern accent it is I'm doing. It's a mix of all of them. 2 runs scored. You're lucky I don't do Cockney. He could turn into Eliza Doolittle at any second. 2 runs scored. I figured I should have been out of the inning, and I got mad. Then a couple of base hits followed on top of that. He claimed that he thought that at that moment, Cronin had pulled him from the game by the simple expedient not of coming out to the mound, but by making frustrated gestures from the dugout. That was a self-exculpating excuse offered by an embarrassed old man. The truth was that Farrell simply walked off the mound in disgust. With Boob McNair, with himself, who knows? He proceeded past the dugout to the showers, and thenceforth, not waiting for the end of the game, went to the team hotel. After Powell's grounder had gotten past McNair, Farrell had walked Tony Lazzeri and allowed a 2-run single to pitcher Pearson. At that point, wrote the Globe's Hy Hurwitz with what we presume is a more objective account, Wes exploded. He fired his cap and glove in the air and marched off the field. He didn't even allow relief pitcher Jack Russell time to warm up. According to a majority of the players, Wes did the same thing in Boston last Sunday. We'll get back to that in a second. As you would expect, this was front page news in Boston the next day. I'm all through with him, Cronin said. He's going to be fined $1,000, suspended, and sent home. I don't care if he goes to Boston, to his North Carolina home, or to the Fiji Islands. I'm washed up with that guy. One of the writers asked Joe if he would back down when he cooled off. You're not kidding, are you, Joe? That angered Cronin even more. Did you ever know me to kid under such circumstances? No, sir. That fine and suspension goes. And you know what Joe Cronin's word was worth, don't you, folks? You could make bank on his promises. At certain banks. Certain unlicensed, unregistered ones. In somebody's trunk say, I'll quit I don't know if I'm ahead. As Hurwitz indicated, Farrell might have walked out on his previous start, but the club covered it up, saying he had left due to heat exhaustion. As it happened, Cronin had to buy time for a reliever to warm up by having an outfielder pretend that he had snapped one of his shoelaces. Farrell had been pitching in Boston against the Senators. Boob McNair again let a ball get through the infield, or the ball smacked by Cecil Travis was just a hit. I can't comment on the difficulty of the play at this late date. The ball had gone up the middle, and it took center fielder Doc Kramer, who had been playing deep, forever to run in and retrieve it, and so Travis had a ground rule double. At that point, Farrell just noped out of there. But again, the club overlooked it. They went past it until he did it in a second consecutive start. Earlier in his career, when Farrell was with Cleveland, he had twice refused to give his manager, Roger Peckinpah, the ball when Peck came out to relieve him, and that, too, resulted in fines and suspensions. So in one case, he's resistant, and in the other, he's premature. In the former case, he completed a ton of his games. That was in part why he was done so early, or at least done as an ace, or even a league average pitcher. It was also consistent with the way pitchers were used at the time. But what is the worst thing that's going to happen in that instance if he refuses to leave a game? Well, it shows up, the manager embarrasses him. There could be ejections and, again, fines, not just from the club, but the league. It's kind of ridiculous. It's petulant, childish, but the damage, it seems to me, is kind of minimal. However, in the opposite case, the case where he just said, nope, I'm done. You can't run a ball club that way. You need time to warm up relievers. You need to know that you're going to need a reliever. Not that he was pitching well. That was the whole point. Maybe Cronin should have been a little bit ahead on that, but he wasn't. And so Farrell left his team in the lurch, and all his teammates knew it, and no, they did not appreciate him acting that way. When the writers caught up to Farrell and informed him that he had been suspended and fined $1,000, as it turned out, he was pretty upset. They asked him what he was going to do about it, and he supposedly replied, punch Cronin in the nose the minute I see him. But that wasn't what happened. Nor did the punishment stick, as I intimated earlier. Rather, what happened was what always happened. Farrell and Cronin talked when they were calmer. The fine was rescinded, and the suspension was reduced from indefinitely to 10 days. But even that wasn't really the case. Farrell was back on the mound 5 days later. It was a pretty bad Red Sox team. Pitching was what it had. It had about 1.5 hitters, one of whom was Rick Farrell, not at a high level, but at a decent one. The other was Jimmy Fox, who was killing it that year in his Miguel Cabrera fashion. Or maybe Miguel Cabrera killed it in a Jimmy Fox fashion, but you know what I mean. Cronin needed Wes Ferrell to be pitching at his best, even if he did lose control sometimes. And I don't envy that. I don't ever envy anger. It is the most both destructive and self-destructive of the emotions. Sometimes it can be a positive motivator, but mostly it's a bomb that blows up and not only injures its creator, the bomb maker, that is the energy inside you that engendered that feeling, but it hurts the people around him who are generally the people that he cares about. And so it is much better, as Mark Twain wrote, when angry, count to 10. When very angry, swear. No, wait, that's contrary to what I was trying to tell you. When angry, count to 10 and swear inwardly if you must, but don't give voice to it if it's going to wound someone who you, every other minute of the day, cherish. And even if you don't cherish them, who knows? They might press charges, so better to deal with it in a productive way. However, I do envy him the freedom that anger, that frustration, that boiling over gave him, because just for a moment, between McNair falling short and the consequences rolling in, Wes Ferrell was free. And in that limited sense, I very much want to be like him. You can score this episode. Boob McNair mentions 2. Bobo Newsom mentions 1. Casey Stengel mentions 0. I'm sorry, Charlie, wherever you are. If you want to mention Casey on social media, you can do so with me at stephengoldman.bsky.social. You can also write us, by which I mean me, at infiniteinning@gmail.com, and there's a Facebook group. Simply go to Facebook, search on Infinite Inning, bang, you're there. Should you wish to support the show, and I very much hope you do, please visit patreon.com/The Infinite Inning. And on that note, I'd like to welcome our latest Patreon supporter, Brian. Brian, this one's personal. You know I love you. Thank you so much. Gear of a rudimentary kind available at the-infinite-inning.creator-spring.com. Original soundtrack available gratis at casualobservermusic.bandcamp.com. Finally, should you find yourself with the proverbial moment to spare, please go to the podcatcher of your choice and rate, review, and subscribe. It helps the show gain attention. And if your podcatcher doesn't let you do those things, it's no big deal. Slow down, relax, just go kicking down the cobblestones. That's what this episode is about, feeling groovy. Our theme song, which you are hearing now and have been listening to throughout the episode, was a co-composition of myself and Dr. Rick Mooring, who reminds you to enjoy the good things in that same spirit. Life, love, happiness, and of course, most of all,
money.
No, that wasn't it at all. Weren't you listening? Well, if I can get his attention long enough to explain it one more time, I'll be back next week with more tales from inside the Infinite Inning.